The road to the cabin was almost empty, covered in light snow that made everything look peaceful yet lonely. Emily drove in silence, her fingers tapping the steering wheel as she tried to shake off the heavy thoughts that had followed her from Boston. It had been 3 months since her engagement ended. 3 months of trying to convince herself she was fine, pretending she didn't miss the life she thought she would have. The trip to Vermont was supposed to be her escape, quiet weekend by the lake where she could breathe again, and maybe feel something close to peace. When she finally reached the cabin, the sky was turning grey, the air sharp with winter chill. She parked her car and stepped out, wrapping her coat tighter around her. The cabin stood quietly among the trees, its wooden frame dusted with snow, smoke rising faintly from the chimney. It looked like a postcard, the kind of place that promised calmness. For the first time in weeks, Emily felt a small wave of relief. She could already picture herself sitting by the fireplace with a book and hot chocolate, far from everything that had hurt her. But as she started to unpack her things, she noticed headlights coming up the narrow path behind her. The bright beams cut through the falling snow, and her relief quickly turned into confusion. She wasn't expecting anyone. The rental listing had promised privacy, and she had made sure to book it alone. A black SUV pulled up beside her car, and a man stepped out, brushing snow from his jacket. He looked surprised to see her standing there. "Hey," he said, voice calm but uncertain. "I think there's been a mistake. I booked this cabin for the weekend." Emily frowned. "That can't be right. I booked it too." They both pulled out their phones, each showing the same cabin listing, the same dates, and the same confirmation message. It didn't make sense. The owner had somehow double-booked the place. Emily sighed, frustration mixing with disbelief. "This is ridiculous. It's almost dark and the nearest town is like an hour away." The man nodded, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, and I'm not sure my car can handle those icy roads again tonight." He gave a small, awkward smile. "I'm Daniel, by the way. Emily." She hesitated for a second, then glanced at the cabin door. "Well, it's got 2 bedrooms, right? We can just stay tonight and sort this out in the morning." He seemed to think about it, then nodded. "Yeah, that makes sense. I promise I'm not a serial killer or anything." Emily gave a small laugh despite herself. Good to know. Inside, the cabin was warm and cozy, the kind of place built for quiet moments. There was a stone fireplace in the corner, 2 small bedrooms down the hall, and a kitchen that smelled faintly of pine. Emily set her bags down and took a breath, still feeling awkward about sharing the space with a stranger. Daniel moved easily, polite but not intrusive. He offered to start a fire, and she let him. Soon, the soft crackle of burning wood filled the room, adding warmth to the silence. They both tried to act normal, talking about the storm outside, the long drive, and the booking mix-up, but underneath their words was something quieter. Both of them were here for the same reason, even if they didn't say it aloud, to escape something they couldn't quite face. As night settled in, the snow began to fall harder, covering the trees and the cars outside. The cabin lights flickered, and the sound of wind grew stronger. Emily looked out the window, watching flakes dance through the air. "Looks like we're not going anywhere tonight," she said softly. Daniel joined her at the window. "Guess we're stuck." There was no frustration in his voice, only acceptance. It was strange, but somehow Emily didn't feel uneasy. Maybe it was the way he spoke, calm and steady, or maybe it was just the exhaustion catching up with her. For the first time in months, she wasn't thinking about the man who had walked out of her life. She wasn't thinking about what went wrong. She was just here in this quiet cabin, in this unexpected situation, with someone who didn't demand anything from her. After dinner, they both sat by the fire with mugs of tea. The glow from the flames danced across Daniel's face as he stared into the fire, lost in thought. Emily wanted to ask what brought him here, but she didn't. Some things didn't need to be rushed. Outside, the wind howled through the woods, and inside, the silence grew softer, more comfortable. Emily leaned back on the couch, her eyes heavy. The warmth, the flickering light, the faint hum of the storm, it all blended together. Daniel looked over at her, smiling slightly when he saw she had fallen asleep. He quietly placed a blanket over her shoulders before heading to his room. Neither of them had expected this night, this strange turn of events. They were two people running from different kinds of pain, yet fate had placed them under the same roof. Emily didn't know it yet, but this night would stay with her. The snowstorm, the fire, the stranger who wasn't supposed to be there, all of it was about to change something deep inside her. None of them had planned this. But sometimes, life doesn't need a plan. It just happens and leaves you wondering if maybe, just maybe, you were meant to be there all along. By the time darkness settled, the storm outside had turned fierce. The wind pushed against the windows, and the snow came down like a curtain, covering everything in white. Inside, the cabin glowed softly from the fireplace Daniel had managed to keep alive. Emily sat near the fire, holding a mug of tea between her hands, while Daniel fixed a flickering lamp that refused to stay lit. It felt strange but peaceful, the kind of night that makes you forget about the world outside. Daniel finally got the light to work. He gave a small grin. "There. I might not be a handyman, but I can fix a lamp." Emily laughed quietly, the sound echoing through the small cabin. "Impressive. You just earned yourself some tea." He accepted it, their hands brushing briefly, and a moment of silence followed, warm, comfortable, not awkward. They sat near the fire, the storm howling around them, as if the world outside didn't exist. After a few minutes, Daniel broke the silence. "So, what brought you all the way out here? Vermont's not exactly a vacation spot this time of year." Emily smiled faintly, trying to escape the noise. "My life got messy, I guess. I needed a break." She paused, eyes on the fire. "I was supposed to get married last spring, but things changed." Daniel's voice softened. "I'm sorry. That must have been hard." She shrugged lightly. "I guess I saw it coming. We wanted different things. I just didn't want to admit it." He nodded, understanding more than he said. "I know what that feels like. My dad passed away 2 months ago. I've been trying to process it. He was my best friend, and when he was gone, everything started feeling dumpty." Emily looked at him quietly, her eyes soft with empathy. "That's a lot to carry alone." He gave a small smile. "Yeah. I thought maybe a few quiet days with my camera would help. But I didn't expect to share a cabin with someone who gets it." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Not pity, not sadness, just a quiet recognition of two people who were both trying to heal. The hours slipped by easily after that. They talked about small things, how Emily loved to bake when she was stressed, how Daniel had once gotten lost on a photography trip in Colorado, how both of them secretly loved the quiet more than the noise of the city. The storm outside seemed to fade into the background. When the power finally went out, the cabin fell into a deep silence. The only light came from the fire. Daniel found a flashlight and placed it on the table, the beam casting soft shadows across the room. "Looks like it's just us and the fire now," he said. Emily smiled faintly. "I think I'm okay with that." The quiet between them felt different now, closer, warmer. She could hear the wind, the soft crackling of the fire, and the rhythm of her own heartbeat that seemed to grow louder with every passing second. Daniel leaned back, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "You ever think about how strange life is?" he said. "Two people from completely different places end up stuck together in a storm, sharing stories like they've known each other forever." Emily looked at him, the corner of her lips lifting. Maybe it's not strange. Maybe we're just supposed to meet certain people at the right time. Daniel nodded slowly, eyes still on her. Maybe. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was full of things they didn't say. How it felt good to be understood. How the loneliness inside them seemed to ease. Even if only for tonight. Emily wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Daniel noticed and quietly got up to place another log on the fire. The flame grew stronger, painting the room with a golden glow. When he sat back down, she looked at him and said softly, "Thank you. For being kind." He smiled. "You don't have to thank me. You just needed someone to listen." Outside, the snow kept falling, covering the world in silence. Inside, two hearts that had been tired for far too long began to feel alive again. It wasn't love not yet, but it was something real. Something that made them both feel seen. Hours later, when the storm showed no sign of stopping, they decided to make the best of it. Daniel pulled out his camera and showed Emily photos from his travels, deserts, mountains, faces of strangers he'd met along the way. Each picture had a story, and his voice softened when he spoke about them. Emily watched him talk, his passion, his calmness, the light in his eyes. It had been so long since she'd been around someone who still believed in the beauty of life. She didn't say anything, but her chest felt lighter, as if something inside her had started to heal. When the clock passed midnight, Daniel noticed her yawning. "You should get some rest," he said gently. "I will," she replied, but she didn't move. She just sat there for a few more moments, watching the snow fall through the small cabin window. The world outside was white and still, but inside, everything felt warm. Before heading to her room, she turned back and said softly, "Good night, Daniel." He smiled, his voice low. "Good night, Emily." As she lay in bed, the sound of the fire still faint in the distance, she thought about how strange it all was. How one wrong booking, one snowstorm, had brought her here. She didn't know what this connection was or what it meant, but it felt right. For the first time in months, she wasn't thinking about the past. She was thinking about the now, about this quiet night, this warm fire, and the man sitting just outside her door who somehow made the silence feel safe. None of them had planned it. But sometimes, life doesn't ask what you want. It just gives you what you need. Even if it arrives in the form of a stranger on a snowy night. The morning sunlight spilled through the cabin windows, soft and golden, touching everything it reached. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world covered in snow that sparkled like glass. Emily woke to the smell of coffee and the faint sound of someone moving in the kitchen. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then it came back to her. The cabin, the storm, Daniel. She sat up, wrapping a blanket around herself, and stepped out quietly. Daniel stood by the window, camera in hand, snapping photos of the frozen lake. He turned when he heard her. "Good morning," he said with a smile that carried the calmness of the new day. "Morning," she replied softly, her voice still sleepy. "Did you even sleep?" "Not much," he admitted. "The light this morning was too perfect to miss. Everything looks new after a storm." Emily joined him at the window. The lake was frozen over, the trees bending slightly under the weight of snow. The air looked clean, untouched. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. Daniel nodded. "Sometimes beauty comes after chaos." She looked at him for a moment, realizing he wasn't just talking about the storm. He handed her a mug of coffee, and they stood in silence, both lost in their thoughts. There was something peaceful about the quietness around them, something grounding. After breakfast, they decided to step outside. The snow crunched under their boots, and their breath came out in white clouds. Daniel took pictures of the lake, the trees, the sunlight breaking through the branches. Emily watched him work. How focused he was. How gently he saw the world through his lens. She hadn't realized how much she missed watching someone chase what they loved. When he turned to show her one of the photos, she smiled. It was of the cabin reflected in the frozen lake with her faint silhouette in the window. Blurred but visible. "I didn't mean to capture you in it," he said, looking almost shy. "But I guess that's how life works. The best things are sometimes accidents." Emily stared at the picture a little longer. "It's beautiful," she said. "I look peaceful." Daniel smiled. "That's because you are. You just don't see it yet." They walked along the lake, talking about simple things. He told her about his photography trips across the country, how he chased sunsets in Arizona and storms in Maine. She told him about her job at a publishing house and how she'd forgotten what it felt like to do something just for herself. Every conversation felt easy, honest, like they had known each other longer than a single night. When they returned to the cabin, the sky was turning light grey. The snow had stopped, but the air was still biting cold. Emily began to pack her things, not sure how to feel about leaving. She had come to Vermont to be alone, but now the thought of driving away felt heavier than she expected. Daniel noticed. "You heading out today?" She nodded. "Yeah, I should get back. I've been running away from reality long enough." He smiled, though his eyes softened. "Sometimes running away helps us see things more clearly." Emily zipped up her bag. "What about you?" "I'll probably leave tomorrow," he said. "There's a few shots I still want to take. The lake at sunset, maybe." She hesitated, then said, "You'll have to send me one of those pictures." He chuckled. "I will, but only if you promise to send me your next published book." She laughed. "Deal." They stood near the door for a moment, both unsure what to say next. The silence between them felt loaded, as if it carried all the words they couldn't say. Finally, Daniel reached into his jacket and handed her a small photograph, the one he'd taken earlier of the lake with her reflection. "For you," he said softly. "A reminder of accidental beauty." Emily took it, her fingers brushing his. "Thank you," she whispered. He smiled, the kind of smile that stays with you even after you look away. "Drive safe, Emily." She nodded, then opened the door. The cold air rushed in, sharp and clean. For a few seconds, she just stood there, looking at the snow-covered road, knowing that leaving wasn't going to be easy. As she drove away, the cabin faded in the rearview mirror, but Daniel's face stayed clear in her mind. She didn't understand what had happened between them, or what it meant, but she knew it was something rare, something real. When she reached the main road, she pulled over for a moment and looked at the photo he had given her. Her reflection, faint but visible, surrounded by snow and stillness. It felt like a message she hadn't known she needed, to see herself not as broken or lost, but as someone beginning again. That night, back in her Boston apartment, everything felt different. The city lights no longer looked harsh. The silence didn't feel so heavy. She placed the photo on her bedside table and smiled. Maybe it was just a coincidence, or maybe it was something more. Days passed, and they started texting now and then. It wasn't constant, just simple messages. "Hope your day's good," or "You'd love the sunset here." It was enough to remind her that he was still out there, somewhere, with his camera and calm smile. Sometimes, she'd catch herself thinking about the cabin, the sound of the fire, the way his voice softened when he spoke about his father. It wasn't love yet, but it was something that reached deeper than friendship. Something gentle that filled the quiet spaces inside her heart. Neither of them had planned it, but maybe that was the beauty of it. Some connections aren't built, they simply happen. And when they do, they remind you that even after life's coldest storms, warmth has a way of finding its way back in. The storm was gone, leaving behind a quiet world covered in white. The morning sunlight touched the snow, making everything shimmer like glass. Emily woke up slowly, the smell of coffee pulling her out of sleep. For a second, she forgot where she was. Then she remembered the cabin, the storm, and Daniel. She slipped out of bed, wrapping herself in a sweater, and stepped into the main room. The fire from last night had burned down to soft embers, and Daniel stood near the window with his camera, capturing the bright, frozen morning. When he saw her, he smiled. "You missed a perfect sunrise," he said. Emily rubbed her eyes, smiling back. "I'll survive. I don't do mornings." Daniel laughed lightly. "Then you're missing half of life's best moments." He handed her a steaming mug of coffee. "Here, this might help." She took it, her fingers brushing his briefly. The small warmth in that touch stayed with her longer than she expected. They stood side by side, looking out at the lake. The storm had transformed everything: trees, roofs, paths into a white wonderland. The lake was frozen, still and silent. "It doesn't even look real," Emily said softly. Daniel raised his camera again. "That's why I love mornings like this. Everything looks new, like the world pressed reset overnight." Emily watched him take photos, focused, calm, completely in the moment. She hadn't seen anyone look at the world that way in a long time. "You really love this, don't you?" she asked. He nodded. "It's the only thing that makes me feel grounded. When I'm behind the camera, everything else fades." There was honesty in his words that caught her off guard. She wanted to ask more, but instead she said, "Maybe I should find something like that too." Daniel turned toward her. "You will. You just need to stop looking in the wrong places." They shared a quiet smile before heading outside. The cold air hit her face, sharp but refreshing. The snow crunched beneath their boots as they walked toward the frozen lake. Daniel started taking photos again of the trees, rippling light on the snow, and once, unknowingly, of her. She laughed as he crouched down in the snow. "You take this seriously?" He grinned. "Photography's about catching what you don't plan. Sometimes the best shots are the ones you never meant to take." Later, back in the cabin, Daniel showed her one of his photos. The lake reflected the sky, and in the faint glassy surface, Emily's reflection was visible through the cabin window. "See that?" he said quietly. "Didn't plan it, but somehow you're in it." Emily stared at the picture for a moment. "It's beautiful." He smiled softly. "Accidents usually are." Something about his tone made her heart feel lighter. She hadn't felt this calm in months. Not since before her breakup. Not since before she'd stopped believing in gentle moments like this. They cooked breakfast together, laughing at small mistakes. Daniel burned the toast and Emily teased him about it. For a while, they forgot about everything outside the cabin. It felt like time had slowed down just for them. When the plates were empty, Emily sat by the window, holding her mug, lost in thought. "You think everything happens for a reason?" she asked suddenly. Daniel looked at her. "I think some things just happen. And sometimes that's the reason." She smiled faintly. "Like this?" He nodded, eyes warm. "Like this." The clock ticked quietly, and the day began to fade. The snow outside glittered in the late sunlight. Emily started packing her things. "I should probably head back before the roads freeze again," she said, though her voice carried a hint of hesitation. Daniel nodded slowly, hiding whatever emotion flickered in his eyes. "Yeah, that's smart. The storm might return tonight." As she gathered her things, he took one last picture, her standing near the window, the soft afternoon light falling across her face. He didn't tell her. Some moments didn't need to be shared right away. When she was ready to leave, he followed her to the door. "You've got everything?" A year had passed since that snowstorm in Vermont. The cabin had become a memory that Emily often revisited in quiet moments. a place that reminded her how healing could start in the most unexpected ways. Life had changed since then. She had moved to a new apartment, started writing again, and finally felt at peace with herself. But no matter how busy her days got, that weekend in the cabin stayed with her. The laughter, the quiet talks, the morning light through the frost, it had all become something she couldn't forget. That winter, when the first snow began to fall in Boston, she felt an ache she couldn't explain. Maybe it was nostalgia, maybe something more. She found herself scrolling through her phone, stopping at the old photo Daniel had given her, the frozen lake with her faint reflection. Beneath it, in his handwriting, were the words, "Some things just happen." She smiled sadly, wondering if he ever thought of her too. One evening, while sipping coffee by her window, she saw an old email pop up from the cabin owner. "Winter bookings are open," it read. She stared at it for a long moment, her heart beating a little faster. She hadn't planned to go back. But some feelings don't fade with time. They just wait quietly. The next morning, she packed her bag and booked the same cabin, same weekend, same place. She told herself it was just to relive a peaceful memory. That deep down, she hoped for something more. Something she didn't dare name. When she reached Vermont, everything looked familiar: the winding road, the tall pine trees, the lake hidden behind layers of snow. The cabin stood the same, though the air around it felt different, quieter. She stepped out of her car and smiled. The wind carried the same chill as it had a year ago, and the smell of pine filled the air. Inside, the cabin was warm, the fire already lit by the caretaker. Emily placed her bag down and walked to the window. The lake was frozen again, still and beautiful. For a moment, she let herself believe she could see two silhouettes there, hers and Daniel's, laughing by the fire. She shook her head softly. "Don't be silly," she whispered to herself. He had probably moved on with his life. Maybe he was traveling somewhere far away with his camera, chasing sunsets across the country. She made coffee and sat near the fireplace, letting the warmth sink in. But when she turned toward the door, her breath caught. A familiar figure was standing outside, brushing snow off his jacket. He looked exactly the same: messy hair, calm smile, camera hanging from his shoulder. Daniel. Emily froze, unsure if she was dreaming. He opened the door slowly, as if afraid she might disappear. "I had a feeling you might come back," he said quietly, snow melting on his coat. She stood there, words lost. "How did you—" "I booked the same weekend again," he said, smiling gently. "Guess I wasn't the only one who couldn't forget." For a moment, neither moved. Then they both laughed softly, the sound filling the small cabin like it belonged there. "You look different," he said. "So do you," she replied. "But in a good way." He shrugged, setting down his camera. "Life's been calmer. Still taking photos. I had an exhibition in Portland last month." "That's amazing," she said, her smile genuine. "You always said your work would take you places." He nodded, then looked at her with a familiar warmth. "And you? Still running from the city noise?" "Not anymore," she said softly. "I think I stopped running after that night here." Daniel smiled faintly. "I was hoping you'd say that." They sat by the fire again, just like before. It felt natural, effortless, like time had folded, bringing them back to the same moment. They talked about everything that had happened in the past year. The struggles, the small victories, the moments of peace they'd found. It felt good to share those things with someone who understood silence as much as conversation. When the snow started falling outside, Daniel stood up and said, "Come on. There's something I want to show you." He led her outside toward the lake. The air was cold, but the scene was breathtaking, the world painted white, the lake glimmering faintly under the moonlight. He took out his camera and handed it to her. "Here," he said. "You take one this time." Emily laughed. "I'm terrible at this." "That's fine," he said softly. "Just point it where your heart tells you." She lifted the camera and snapped a photo of the frozen lake, the soft light, and Daniel standing by the water's edge. He walked back to her, smiling. "Not bad," he said, looking at the picture. "You captured something real." She looked at him. "So did you. A year ago." He hesitated for a moment, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small photo one from that morning last year. Beneath it, he had written new words. "Some things don't end. They just find their way back." Emily's eyes softened. "You kept it." "I did," he said, his voice low, "because I hoped this wasn't over." The wind moved gently between them, and for a second, it felt like the world held its breath. Daniel stepped closer, his tone warm but steady. "We didn't plan this, Emily. We didn't even try. But some things are worth not planning." She smiled through tears that she didn't bother to hide. "You're right. None of us planned this. But it happened there. And maybe it was supposed to." They stood in the falling snow, the lake behind them, the same place where it all began. There were no big confessions, no promises. Just two people who had found their way back not because of fate, but because something real had quietly waited for them to return. As the snow thickened, Daniel reached out his hand. Emily took it, her fingers fitting easily in his. They didn't speak again, just stood there watching the white world around them. For both of them, the cabin wasn't just a memory anymore. It had become the place where healing turned into hope, and where hope became something lasting. None of them had planned this. But what began as an accident had become the kind of story that stays not loud or dramatic, but simple, quiet, and true. "Yeah." She hesitated. "Thank you. For being kind. For making the night less lonely." He gave a small smile. "You don't have to thank me, Emily. It was nice having company." They stood there, facing each other, neither wanting to end it. The connection was quiet but deep, like something built on shared silence instead of words. Finally, Daniel reached into his jacket and pulled out a small printed photo, the one from that morning, where her reflection shimmered in the frozen lake. "Keep it," he said softly. "A reminder that not everything beautiful has to be planned." Emily took it carefully. "You're going to make me miss this place even more." He chuckled. "That's kind of the point." The air between them felt charged, not with drama, but with emotion unspoken and real. She wanted to say something else, something more, but couldn't find the words. So she just smiled. "Goodbye, Daniel." "Goodbye, Emily," he said, voice quiet but sure. She stepped outside, the cold air filling her lungs. The sound of snow under her boots echoed in the stillness. As she drove away, the cabin slowly disappeared in her mirror, but the feeling stayed: the peace, the warmth, the strange sense of being understood. That night, back in her city apartment, the world felt different. The noise didn't bother her as much. The walls didn't feel so close. She placed the photo Daniel gave her on her desk and stared at it for a long time. Her reflection in the lake looked calm, almost like a version of herself she hadn't seen in years. She realized something simple, that healing didn't always come from fixing things. Sometimes it came from moments you didn't expect, from people you didn't plan to meet. Somewhere out there, Daniel was probably still chasing the light, taking photos of a world that had started to make sense again. And maybe, just maybe, their paths would cross once more. None of them had planned this, but what happened there had quietly changed everything.